If you struggle with people pleasing, perfectionism, or overachievement, you've probably noticed that setting boundaries doesn't always feel good. Even when you're setting appropriate and healthy boundaries, you might still feel guilty. And that's normal, especially in the short term. Today, I want to talk about why this happens and how to figure out when guilt is actually helpful versus when it's just getting in your way. Here's how we'll break it down. First, I'll define guilt and when it's useful. Then, I'll talk about when guilt is misplaced. And finally, I'll share how I started using my values as a kind of litmus test to tell the difference between helpful guilt and misplaced guilt. So let's start with a definition. What is guilt? I like Brené Brown's definition from her books, The Gifts of Imperfection. She says, we feel guilty when we hold up something we've done or failed to do against the kind of person we want to be. She goes on to talk about how guilt can be helpful. It can move us towards repair, accountability, growth. Like when you yell at your kids and later you feel that pang of guilt, it leads you to apologize and reconnect. And that's what I would call helpful guilt. It aligns with your values. But what about when you feel guilty for something that's actually reasonable or even healthy? Let me tell you a story. About 13 years ago, I was a newly licensed psychologist working for a boss who was highly critical and perfectionistic. One day, when I happened to have a doctor's appointment scheduled, my boss told me that we needed to stay late. It had taken me weeks to get that appointment, but I felt so guilty about saying no to my boss and disappointing her that I canceled the appointment and I stayed late anyway. I knew that it would take weeks to get back on the doctor's calendar, but at the time I rationalized it to myself by saying it's not a big deal, it's just a physical, it's nothing urgent. But what I didn't realize was that I was repeatedly making decisions based on what she needed, not what I needed. I had basically defined the kind of person I wanted to be, like Brené Brown says, as someone my boss liked and approved of. And when I didn't meet her standards, even when they were unreasonable, I felt guilty every single time. I didn't have a strong enough connection to my own values to push back. I remember the exact moment when this really hit me and I realized something was wrong. It was a Saturday, and my husband and I were moving into a new apartment, and he was running an errand or something while I was sitting in the car with a bunch of boxes behind me. And I checked my email, of course I did, on a Saturday, and I saw a message from my boss criticizing me for a project that I had initiated that week. She said that I had overstepped, that it needed to be fixed ASAP, and she had CC'd a few of the other supervisors where I worked, just to really make the point. Now, at some level, I knew that this project or mistake really wasn't a big deal, but my emotions were so intense. I completely froze. I spiraled. I spent the whole week anxious and upset, completely unable to be present for settling into the new apartment. Bouts of tearfulness, difficulty sleeping. By Monday, I was exhausted. And I was honestly thinking I was going to have to look for a new job the next day because I was so convinced that I was going to get fired. I didn't get fired, but the disproportionate amount of emotion that I felt in response to the situation clued me in to knowing that something needed to change. So I started being more open in talking with colleagues, and I began noticing some red flags, not just in my boss, but also in myself. For months, I had been having trouble sleeping. I was irritable. I had bouts of tearfulness, not really knowing why, completely depleted, and I was completely miserable. And then I realized my guilt wasn't about violating my values. It was about violating someone else's expectations. So I started questioning those expectations and found that many of them were unreasonable, inconsistent, arbitrary, and not really aligned with my values. And when I reflected on my values, I asked myself, what kind of boss do I want to be someday? What kind of person do I want to show up as at work and at home? And over time, clarifying my values became an internal guide, like a compass that I could use to check and find out or ask myself if my guilt in any given situation was helpful or if it was misplaced. Here's the thing though, even when I started making values aligned choices, the guilt that was misplaced didn't magically go away. That's something I really want you to hear. Just because you're doing the right thing, it doesn't mean it's going to feel good right away. This is totally normal, and it's because our feelings need time to catch up to our beliefs, especially when we're going through some kind of realignment or transformation. We can't expect our guilt to go away immediately, just like in the same way that we can't expect to retrain a reflex immediately. We have to act differently over and over again before it starts to feel natural and come more automatically. Now, eventually, I can tell you from my personal experience and my work with many clients that the intensity of that misplaced guilt does eventually go down. And so then when your helpful guilt shows up, it's actually easier to recognize and respond to. And so this is why, as a therapist, when I help people work on setting healthy boundaries, we don't just focus on what to say. We also work on tolerating uncomfortable feelings. Because when you can tolerate discomfort without letting it take over, you make better decisions. And when you do apologize or make a repair in response to helpful guilt, it actually means something. And it's deeply connected to your clarity about your values, not a need to appease someone else to feel okay about yourself. So if you've been waiting to feel guilt-free before setting healthy boundaries, you don't have to wait. Your values can lead your actions, and your feelings will catch up. Subscribe below for more tools on boundary setting and burnout recovery. You can also check out my weekly blog at www.drnatasha.com.